Welcome to the Alcott Stories channel, where the magic of storytelling meets the beauty of love and life's deepest emotions. Whether you're new to our family or have been following us for a while, we are so grateful to have you here with us. Here, every story is crafted with care, every moment meant to touch your heart, and every journey one of transformation and inspiration. To our new viewers, thank you for joining us on this adventure. We hope you find warmth, joy, and a little bit of your own heart in the stories we share. And to our loyal family, your continued support means the world to us. Thank you for being part of our journey. If you're ready to dive deep into heartwarming tales and soul-stirring emotions, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified every time a new story is shared. Share these moments with your loved ones and be part of our growing community of storytellers. We pray that every soul who stumbles upon Alcott Stories finds peace, hope, and love in their hearts. For our new viewers, may this channel offer you a sense of belonging and comfort, reminding you that you're never alone. For those who have been with us from the start, may your hearts be filled with ever-growing joy, and may our stories continue to inspire you. May your days be full of love, light, and the courage to embrace all the beautiful moments life has to offer. Thank you for being part of the Alcott family. Before dive into the story, I have a question for all of you what's the most life-changing lesson you've learned from a love story, whether it's your own or someone else's? Share with us in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about the lessons love has taught us all. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. The Grand Moonlight Symphony restaurant was a masterpiece of elegance. Velvet drapes hung in deep shades of crimson, and golden chandeliers bathed the room in a soft, opulent glow. The air carried the delicate aroma of aged wine, fresh roses, and decadent cuisine, mingling with the hushed laughter of the city's elite. Tonight, like every other, the room was filled with the wealthiest, the most powerful, the ones who dictated the world's rhythm with their fortunes and influence. And among them, sitting at the best table, was Daniel Harrington. Dressed in a custom-tailored Armani suit, he looked effortlessly dominant, a man who had never known failure. His sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, and the slight smirk that played on his lips made him dangerously alluring. Women adored him, men envied him, and he walked through life knowing that the world bent to his will. Tonight, he was surrounded by a select few, billionaire friends, investors, and models who laughed too easily, enchanted by his presence. Across the room, weaving gracefully between tables, was Celeste Monroe. Unlike the glittering guests, she wore a simple black uniform, but it could never dim her natural beauty. Her rich brown skin glowed like honey under candlelight, and her long lashes framed eyes the color of warm hazel, deep and unreadable. Her full lips held an effortless grace, neither smiling too much nor too little, but always maintaining a sense of quiet strength. She had worked here for years, and nothing in this room intimidated her, except perhaps the storm that was about to unfold. As Celeste approached Daniel's table, holding an expensive bottle of Chateau Margaux, the energy shifted. Daniel barely looked up as she reached for his glass, instead murmuring something to his friend. Then, just as she poured, his voice carried across the table in a lazy, amused tone. "Imagine spending your life taking orders instead of giving them. How tragic." Laughter rippled from his table like an orchestrated chorus, smooth and effortless, a symphony of privilege. Celeste felt the sting instantly. Her grip on the bottle faltered, and for the briefest second her heart clenched. Not because she hadn't heard words like these before, she had, but because of the way he said it, careless, dismissive, as if she were nothing but a fleeting shadow in his grand world. A lesser woman might have swallowed the insult, but Celeste was not a lesser woman. Lifting her chin ever so slightly, she turned her gaze on him. When she spoke, her voice was soft but unwavering, each word wrapped in quiet defiance. And yet, sir, some of us find more dignity in serving with kindness than in ruling with cruelty. Silence. The laughter at the table died instantly. Daniel's smirk faded just enough for Celeste to notice. His fingers, which had been lazily tapping against the crystal wine glass, stilled. No one had ever spoken to him like that. For the first time that night, his eyes truly met hers, a slow, deliberate gaze, as if seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as a woman who had just shaken his arrogance with a single sentence. The moment stretched between them, thick with something neither of them could name yet. Then, as if deciding the game was still his to control, Daniel leaned back, the smirk returning, but softer this time. "Is that so?" Celeste held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary, then nodded. "It is." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding against her ribs. But Daniel, he found himself watching her longer than he should have. And for the first time in a long time, he was intrigued by someone who had nothing to do with money. The evening carried on in its usual rhythm. Laughter, expensive wine being poured into crystal glasses, the soft hum of conversations filling the air. But beneath the grandiose atmosphere of the bare moonlight symphony restaurant, an unexpected disruption was brewing. At the far end of the dining hall, the restaurant's renowned pianist, an elderly man with decades of experience, suddenly clutched his chest, his face paling as he tried to steady himself. Gasps of concern rippled through the guests, and within seconds, the restaurant's manager rushed to his side, helping him away from the performance area. A murmur of distress swept through the room. The entertainment segment was a highlight of the evening. Guests had come expecting an enchanting musical performance. Without it, the night's grandeur would be incomplete. The host's gaze frantically searched the room. His eyes landed on Celeste Monroe, who had just finished clearing a nearby table. He knew about her talents. He had once heard her playing a melody when she thought no one was listening, but this wasn't some quiet, hidden moment in the shadows. This was in front of the richest and most influential guests in the city. He hesitated, then, in desperation, called out to her. "Celeste, please, you can play, can't you?" A hush fell over the restaurant. Heads turned, eyes filled with skepticism and curiosity. Celeste's heart pounded violently in her chest. Play? Here? Now? In front of them? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a familiar, smug voice interrupted. "A waitress playing the piano? That's rich." The words dripped with amusement, sharp and condescending. Daniel Harrington leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass, his blue eyes gleaming with entertained arrogance. Laughter rippled through his table as if his words alone had sealed Celeste's fate, that she wasn't worthy of the opportunity. Celeste felt the heat rise in her chest, but she refused to let him see her shaken. Instead, she inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and without acknowledging his insult, turned towards the grand piano at the center of the room. The world felt impossibly large and suffocating. As she walked forward, past the judgmental stares, past the whispers questioning whether she would embarrass herself, she reached the piano, her fingers hovering above the smooth ivory keys. A single breath, a single touch, and then music. A note so soft yet powerful filled the room, piercing through the thick veil of cynicism. Celeste's fingers moved with grace, each stroke bringing the piano to life, weaving a melody so heartbreakingly beautiful that it stole the breath from everyone who listened. The notes spilled like secrets, like pain and passion bottled up for too long, now unleashed into the air, for the world to witness. Her music spoke where words could not. It told a story of longing, of struggle, of dreams kept locked away. She closed her eyes, lost in the peace, her soul entwining with every sound. And then Daniel Harrington froze. He had been prepared to scoff, to make another cruel remark, but the moment the first note touched the air, something inside him shifted. His grip on his glass loosened. He stopped leaning back so carelessly. His heart pounded in an unfamiliar rhythm. What was this? This ache in his chest, this strange pull toward the woman he had dismissed only moments ago. The way she played, it was unlike anything he had ever heard, and he had heard the greatest pianists in the world, yet none of them, none, had ever made him feel like this. A deep silence settled as Celeste reached the final aching note, letting it hang in the air, haunting and bittersweet. For a moment there was nothing. Then applause erupted. It was thunderous, overwhelming. People stood, some even wiping their eyes, moved beyond words, but Celeste's gaze, it remained locked onto Daniel. She saw it, the crack in his arrogance, the quiet disbelief in his expression, the way his lips had parted slightly, as if he had been caught in a spell and didn't know how to escape. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't smirking. For the first time in his life, Daniel Harrington was speechless. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself drawn back to the Moonlight Symphony restaurant, a place he once regarded as nothing more than another extravagant venue for the elite. Now it was different. She was different. He didn't understand why, but something about Celeste intrigued him, pulled at him in ways he wasn't used to. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more, yet he returned night after night, sitting at the bar, watching her move between tables with effortless grace. His usual arrogance melted into something unfamiliar. Fascination. He didn't just see her, he studied her. The way her curls framed her face, the quiet strength in her posture, the way she laughed with warmth despite the world's cruelty. He found himself noticing things he never had before, like the slight furrow of her brow when she was deep in thought, or the way her fingers sometimes danced along the piano's surface when she believed no one was watching. And yet, it frustrated him. Daniel Harrington was not a man used to being intrigued. He had spent his life controlling everything, his business, his wealth, his desires, but Celeste. She was an enigma. She didn't fawn over him like other women. She didn't care about his money or his power. And worse, she had seen him vulnerable that night, when her music had made him feel something he didn't want to admit. One evening after the restaurant had closed, he stayed behind, lingering in the dimly lit space, sipping a drink he wasn't really tasting. Celeste was at the piano again, unaware of his presence at first. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, weaving a melody so delicate yet haunting, it sent an unfamiliar ache through his chest. He leaned against the bar, watching her, his throat dry. He couldn't resist any longer. The rich, warm sound of the piano filled the empty restaurant as Daniel approached, his expensive shoes tapping softly against the marble floor. Celeste must have sensed him because she slowly lifted her gaze, her hazel eyes meeting his under the soft glow of the chandelier. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. And that did something to him. Daniel swallowed, his usual confidence faltering. Why was it so hard to speak to her? "That song," he began, his voice lower than he intended. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, a nervous habit he rarely displayed. It felt personal. Celeste studied him, her fingers still resting on the piano keys. Music is personal. Unlike money, it has a soul. He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "You think I have no soul?" She stepped closer, closing the space between them, her presence intoxicating, challenging. "You tell me, Mr. Harrington, do you—" Daniel felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He was always the one in control, always the one with the sharpest tongue. And yet standing here under her piercing gaze, he felt exposed. For the first time in his life, Daniel had no clever retort. He could have walked away, should have, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Celeste tilted her head slightly, observing him as if peeling away his layers. "You come here every night now, sitting at the bar, watching me. Why?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth, the real truth, felt too raw to say aloud. He settled for something safer. "Maybe I like the atmosphere." She smirked, folding her arms. "Liar." He chuckled, but it lacked his usual arrogance. "You're a dangerous woman, Celeste." "Dangerous how?" "You make me think, and I don't like it." For the first time, Celeste laughed, not the polite professional chuckle she gave customers, but a real, genuine laugh. It was soft, rich, and entirely too beautiful. Daniel's stomach tightened. He took a step closer, barely a breath away from her now. The air between them shifted, heavy with something neither of them wanted to name. "I don't understand you," he murmured. Celeste's smile faded slightly, her gaze flickering over his face. "That makes two of us." The tension between them was electric, thick with unspoken words and unacknowledged desire. And in that moment, Daniel knew this woman was going to change him in ways he wasn't ready for. The invitation had come unexpectedly. Daniel had asked Celeste to accompany him to an exclusive gala, an event filled with the elite, the powerful, and the untouchable. At first, she resisted, her instincts warning her against stepping too far into his world. But curiosity was a dangerous thing, and in the end, she found herself saying yes. The evening had been a whirlwind of champagne toasts, diamond chandeliers, and whispered conversations of wealth and power. But it wasn't until Daniel led her to the rooftop of the skyscraper that the night truly changed. The city stretched endlessly beneath them, a canvas of glittering lights and infinite possibilities. The wind was cool against Celeste's skin, but the heat between them was undeniable. Daniel stood close, too close. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were softer now, filled with something she didn't recognize. "You confuse me," he admitted, his voice low, intimate. Celeste tilted her head, searching his face. "Someone who doesn't worship your money." He exhaled sharply, a small, wry smile playing at his lips. "Someone who makes me feel unworthy." The words struck her, settling deep in her chest. Before she could respond, before she could overthink it, he reached out, his fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, but it sent a tremor through her. The moment stretched between them, thick with tension. The world around them faded until there was only this, only them. Then, without hesitation, Daniel pulled her close, their bodies pressing together, and captured her lips in a kiss. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a battle, a surrender, a firestorm of passion that neither of them had expected. Celeste's breath caught as her hands instinctively gripped his collar, pulling him in deeper. Daniel groaned against her mouth, his arms wrapping around her, his fingers tracing slow, reverent patterns along the curve of her back. The kiss grew more urgent, more desperate, as if they were both afraid to stop, to acknowledge the depth of what was happening. Celeste felt his heart pounding against hers, mirroring the wild rhythm of her own. The rooftop air was cool, but they burned for each other, lost in the moment, lost in something neither of them had prepared for. Daniel's hands moved up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing against her cheeks as he deepened the kiss, drinking her in as if she was the only thing keeping him alive. Celeste whimpered against his lips, her body melting into his, surrendering to a pull stronger than logic, stronger than doubt. When their lips finally parted, Daniel didn't step away. His hands remained on her waist, holding her as if afraid she might disappear. Celeste's breath was unsteady, her chest rising and falling as she tried to find words for what had just happened. "What are we doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling, not just from the kiss, but from the intensity of the emotions coursing through her. Daniel's forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm against her skin. His voice was raw, stripped of the usual arrogance that defined him. Falling. A silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of something unspoken. Celeste searched his eyes, looking for the man beneath the layers of privilege and power. And for the first time, she saw it. The vulnerability, the yearning, the unguarded need. Daniel let out a shaky exhale and took her hands, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, his lips lingering. "You make me feel things I don't understand," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Celeste swallowed hard, emotions tangling inside her. "Maybe it's not about understanding. Maybe it's about feeling." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then looked at her again, something new and fragile in his gaze. "Then I don't want to stop feeling." The city buzzed below them, but in that moment, all that existed was the space between their hearts and the undeniable pull drawing them closer. And Celeste knew this was just the beginning of something neither of them could control. The night felt heavier than usual, the tension thick in the air as Daniel sat at his usual spot at the private club, surrounded by the laughter and chatter of his elite friends. They were sipping champagne, casually discussing the latest investments, their voices filled with the hollow sound of privilege. Yet, all Daniel could focus on was the thought of her, the memory of Celeste's voice, her soft laughter, the way her hands danced across the piano keys like they were meant to be there. His friends hadn't wasted a moment to bring her up. "A waitress, Daniel." "Come on, she's not one of us," one of them mocked, his eyes glinting with judgment. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the words striking a nerve that he hadn't expected. He had never cared about the opinions of these people before, but Celeste was different. She wasn't just anyone to him. She was a melody in his life, a song he couldn't quite stop humming. Yet, in that moment, the weight of their words pulled him away from her, and the familiar armor of his arrogance returned. "She's a waitress," another friend added, his voice laced with condescension. "You've got to be kidding. What does she have to offer?" Daniel could feel the flames of shame flicker in his chest. He knew what they were saying, and yet something inside him, a small, fragile part, screamed that they were wrong. But he didn't defend her, not then. Instead, he found himself standing outside her world, his wealth, his connections, his status, all holding him back from embracing the woman who had touched his soul. The guilt gnawed at him, but his pride, that insidious force he'd built over the years, demanded he make a choice. He chose the life he knew, the one that was safe, that didn't involve the risk of being vulnerable. The next day, Celeste stood in front of him at the restaurant, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something she couldn't find. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated. His mouth went dry, and for the first time he didn't know what to say. The words felt hollow in his throat. He had pushed her away with nothing but silence. "Daniel, what's going on?" she pressed, her voice filled with hurt. There was a pain in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, something raw and real that cut through his arrogance like a knife. I think we should stop," he finally muttered, his voice sounding alien even to him. "It's not working. You're not like me, Celeste." The words fell from his lips like stones, heavy and cold. Celeste's gaze flickered with disbelief, and for a moment the whole world seemed to stop around them. She had never expected this from him, not from the man who had kissed her with such passion, who had whispered promises of forever into her ear. Her heart, which had once raced with the hope of something beautiful, now shattered in front of him. "You're right," she whispered, her voice trembling. We come from different worlds, and I deserve more than this, more than you." Her words stung like a slap in the face, but they were true. Celeste straightened up, her pride taking over the pain that threatened to break her. She had known from the beginning that their worlds were incompatible, but she had never imagined that the one person who had made her believe in love again would be the one to destroy it. She turned away, her back straight, her head held high. "You never deserved my music, or my heart," she murmured, her voice barely audible. As she walked away, Daniel felt as though the ground beneath him had given way. His chest tightened, his breath shallow, and in that moment he realized just how much he had lost. His arrogance, his wealth, the life he had so carefully crafted, none of it mattered. Celeste was the one thing he truly wanted, the one thing he had always needed, but never truly understood. And now she was slipping through his fingers, disappearing into the night like a fleeting melody he could no longer catch. He stood there, paralyzed by regret, watching her leave. The ache in his chest was unbearable, a constant throb of emptiness that would never fade. He had made a mistake he couldn't undo. Days turned into weeks, each one dragging Daniel deeper into the suffocating pit of his own regret. He tried to bury the pain of losing Celeste in the only way he knew: work. He threw himself into meetings, deals, and investments, filling his days with the cold, lifeless hustle of business. But no matter how many contracts he signed or zeros he added to his bank account, the hollow ache inside him only grew. His mind would inevitably wander back to her, the soft curve of her smile, the way her fingers danced across the piano keys, her voice that had once soothed him like a lullaby. But that wasn't all. He tried drowning himself in women, beautiful, empty faces who smiled at him with affection that didn't reach their eyes. He attended lavish parties, drank expensive liquor, and surrounded himself with people who couldn't see past his wealth. Yet each time he reached for the fleeting pleasures of his superficial world, he felt the same emptiness gnawing at him. They couldn't replace her. They couldn't replace the feeling of having her close, the connection they'd shared, the way she had looked at him with a quiet understanding that no one else had ever shown him. It didn't matter how much he surrounded himself with luxury or distractions. It was never enough. One night, after yet another round of meaningless conversation and champagne at a social gathering, Daniel stumbled out of the club, drunk and disheveled, the weight of his loneliness too much to bear. His steps were unsteady, his mind a blur, but there was only one place he could think of: the Moonlight Symphony restaurant. He found himself outside the familiar doors, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he pushed them open. The warmth of the restaurant greeted him, but it wasn't the usual comfort of wealth and power that filled the air. It was the soft, melancholic sound of a piano playing in the corner that drew him in. The familiar chords struck a chord deep within him, the melody so achingly beautiful it felt like it was speaking directly to his broken soul. His heart skipped a beat as he saw her, Celeste, sitting at the grand piano, her fingers moving with grace, weaving a sorrowful tune that seemed to reflect every ounce of his inner torment. She was alone, lost in the music, and for a moment Daniel stood frozen at the door, completely captivated by her presence. She had a way of making the world fade away, of turning everything else into a distant memory. But then, as if she sensed his arrival, she stopped playing. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, and her gaze slowly drifted toward him. The sharpness of her stare pierced through him, cutting him deeper than any of his business deals or nights of indulgence ever could. She looked at him with eyes that held no warmth, no tenderness, just cold, quiet judgment. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice like ice, her tone detached. It was the first time she had spoken to him like that, so distant, so removed. And it hurt more than he could have ever imagined. The questions he had asked himself in silence. Why had he pushed her away? What had he been thinking? All rushed back to him, filling his chest with an unbearable weight. He swallowed hard, trying to collect himself, but the regret was written all over his face. His eyes were shiny, bloodshot, his voice unsteady as he stepped closer to her, his feet moving of their own accord, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. "Because without you, I have everything, and nothing," he whispered, his words heavy with the pain of realization. Celeste's face softened for the briefest of moments, but she didn't respond. She just stared at him, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but she didn't play. She was waiting for something more than just an apology. Daniel stood there, struggling to find the right words, but no matter what he said, he knew he couldn't undo what had already been done. He had pushed her away, made her feel unworthy, and in doing so he had lost the most beautiful part of his life. She had been his music, his melody, his salvation, and now she was a stranger to him, an echo of something that had once been real. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should never have pushed you away. I didn't know what I had until it was gone." The sincerity in his words hung in the air, but Celeste didn't react right away. She simply looked at him with an unreadable expression, the weight of her silence pressing down on him like 1,000 pounds. Finally, she exhaled slowly, the coldness in her voice dissolving just a little. "I don't need your apology, Daniel," she said, her gaze dropping to the piano keys. "I don't need your regret. I need you to understand something." Daniel moved closer, his heart pounding, his hands trembling as he reached for her. "What is it, Celeste?" he asked, his voice desperate. She raised her eyes to meet his, her expression unreadable, but there was something softer in her gaze now, a hint of vulnerability that made his chest tighten. "You're not the man I fell for anymore," she said, her words gentle but firm. "You became someone else, someone who let pride destroy everything beautiful in his life." The words cut through him, sharper than any knife. He wanted to argue, to fight for her, but there was no fighting what she was saying. She was right. He was empty without her, and no amount of luxury, no number of business deals could ever fill that void. The rain fell in heavy sheets, each drop a reminder of the storm inside Daniel's heart. He stood outside Celeste's apartment, soaked to the bone, the cold biting into his skin. The world around him seemed drowned in the chaos of the downpour, but all he could focus on was the small, battered piano key he held in his hand, the key she had once dropped near him, the one that had been the symbol of everything he had lost. It was all he had left of her, all that remained of the love he had taken for granted. His heart raced as he stared at the worn, faded key, its edges frayed from the time it had spent apart from her. It was a reminder of their shared moments, of the music they had created together, of the deep connection that had once bound them, and yet now it felt like a sad, fragile token of a love that was slipping away, just like the rain that drenched him. He took a deep breath, his chest tightening with fear and determination. His mind kept replaying every word Celeste had said, the truth that had pierced him like an arrow. He had been foolish, prideful, arrogant. But now, as he stood here in the pouring rain, he knew that he would do anything to make things right. He couldn't lose her. Not again. With shaking hands, he raised his fist to knock on her door. His knuckles trembled against the wood, the sound echoing in the quiet night. It felt like an eternity before the door slowly creaked open, and there she was, standing before him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the hallway light. Celeste looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and wariness. Her wet hair clung to her face, and her expression was unreadable. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at him as though she wasn't sure if he was real or just a ghost from her past. Daniel's heart beat erratically in his chest, the silence between them unbearable. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He had so much to say, so many apologies, but nothing seemed to be enough. Instead, he held out the piano key, his fingers trembling as he offered it to her. This is all I have left of you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "And it's not enough. I need all of you, Celeste. Please, I need you." Celeste's eyes softened, but there was still a flicker of uncertainty in them. She glanced at the piano key, then back at him, her breath catching in her throat. The air between them seemed to vibrate with the intensity of their unspoken words, but she didn't take the key. Not yet. She didn't move, didn't say anything, as though waiting for him to prove that his words were more than just empty promises. Daniel's heart ached as he watched her, the distance between them like a chasm that no words or gestures could cross. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if everything he had ever held on to, his pride, his wealth, his world, had been stripped away, leaving only the raw truth of his love for her. And so, in a moment of desperation, he took a step forward, crossing the threshold of her door without asking for permission. His eyes locked onto hers, and his voice broke as he whispered, "I love you, Celeste. I always have, and I always will." The words were more than just a confession. They were a plea, a promise, a declaration of everything he had been too blind to see before. His soul was laid bare before her, and all he wanted, needed, was for her to take him back, to forgive him for the pain he had caused. For a long moment, Celeste didn't speak. She just stood there, her eyes searching his face, as though looking for some sign that this wasn't just another empty gesture. And then, without warning, she reached for him, her hands trembling as they gripped the front of his soaked jacket. Daniel didn't hesitate. He pulled her into him, his arms wrapping around her like a lifeline. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of her. The feeling of her body pressed against his, the only thing that seemed to make sense in the storm of emotions raging inside him. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely, his lips brushing against her ear. "I was stupid. I pushed you away, and I can never take that back. But I swear I'll never let you go again. I can't. I won't." Tears welled in Celeste's eyes as she clung to him, her heart beating wildly in her chest. The weight of everything that had come before, the pain, the heartache, the loss, seemed to melt away in that moment. The world outside didn't matter. There was only him, and there was only her. She tilted her head up to meet his gaze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Then don't ever let me go again," she whispered, her voice trembling with the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long. Without another word, she kissed him. It was fierce and passionate, a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through, everything they had overcome. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, as if trying to erase the distance that had once separated them. Daniel kissed her back, his hands roaming through her hair, his heart pounding in his chest. He poured everything he had into that kiss, his regret, his love, his promise for the future. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a lifetime, 1,000 emotions crashing together in a moment of perfect unity. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his hand still holding her tightly. "I'm never letting you go again, Celeste," he whispered, his voice low and steady with newfound resolve. "Never." Celeste smiled through her tears, her fingers tracing the lines of his face as she whispered back, "Then make sure you keep that promise." And as they stood there in the warmth of her apartment, the storm outside felt miles away. There was only them now, two souls that had found their way back to each other, their love stronger than ever before. Months passed, but the love between Daniel and Celeste had only grown stronger with each passing day. They had weathered the storms of life, fought for each other, and finally now stood on the precipice of their future. It was a love that had transcended the barriers of wealth, race, and pride, a love that had been forged in fire and had come out of it more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The sun had just begun to set, casting a soft, golden glow across the world as guests gathered in the beautiful, intimate chapel. The air was thick with anticipation, the room filled with the soft murmur of conversations. But none of it mattered. All eyes were on the bride. Celeste stood in the doorway, a vision of grace and beauty, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked out at the sea of faces. She wore a gown of white silk, the fabric flowing around her like a dream. Each step she took toward the altar feeling like a step toward forever. The dress clung to her figure in all the right places, but it was her smile, her radiant, heart-stopping smile, that made the room feel as if it had been frozen in time. As she walked down the aisle, every step echoed like a beat in a song that had been written for them both. Her hand, steady and sure, held the arm of her father, the man who had always supported her dreams, even when the world seemed determined to crush them. And though there was an undeniable sadness in his eyes, there was also pride. Pride for the woman she had become, the woman who had defied the odds and found love where no one thought it was possible. Daniel stood at the altar waiting for her, and in that moment, nothing else existed. The room, the guests, the world outside, everything faded into the background. It was just him and her. His heart swelled with emotion as he saw her for the first time in her wedding dress. She was more beautiful than he could have ever imagined, more perfect than any dream he had ever dared to dream. His gaze never wavered from hers as she made her way toward him. His breath caught in his throat. The ache in his chest from the day they had almost lost each other still lingered, but now, in this moment, he knew that nothing could ever tear them apart again. When she reached him, he took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. His voice trembled slightly as he whispered, "You are everything I never knew I needed." Celeste smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. She had never imagined a day like this, never thought that the boy who had once mocked her would one day stand before her, the man who vowed to love and cherish her for all eternity. But here they were, proof that love could heal, love could change, love could overcome anything. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice soft and steady, but Daniel couldn't focus on anything except the woman standing before him. When it was time for them to exchange vows, his heart raced. He had written these words in the quiet moments of reflection, pouring his soul into each line, but now, in front of everyone he loved, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "Celeste," he began, his voice strong but filled with emotion, "I once mocked you. I once looked at you as someone beneath me, but now all I can see is a woman who is far greater than I could have ever dreamed. You have taught me what true love is, what it means to give all of yourself to another, and I vow to never take you for granted again. I vow to love you with all that I am, to cherish you, to honor you in every way possible. I mocked you once, but now I vow to worship you forever." Tears welled in Celeste's eyes as she listened to his words. She had never expected this man, the arrogant rich millionaire who had once looked down on her, to stand before her and speak such truth. But here he was, a man transformed, a man who loved her beyond measure, a man who understood her worth. She took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the emotions that threatened to spill over as she spoke her vows. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you once saw me as nothing, but now I see you as everything. You have shown me a love that is deeper than I ever thought possible. You've taught me that my worth isn't defined by the world's expectations, but by the love we share. I vow to stand by you, to love you through every challenge, and to celebrate every joy. I promise to be your strength when you falter, and your peace when the world feels chaotic. and together we will make beautiful music. Our love will be our song, and I promise it will never fade." Daniel's heart swelled as he listened to her words, and as they exchanged rings, he realized that this wasn't just a wedding. It wasn't just a ceremony or a tradition. This was a celebration of their love, a love that had defied the odds, a love that had triumphed over every obstacle. They had fought for each other, and now they would stand together, united in a bond that could never be broken. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel pulled Celeste into his arms, lifting her off the ground as he kissed her with all the passion and love he had. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through, of the pain, the heartache, the growth. But more than that, it was a kiss that spoke of their future, a future they would build together, a future where nothing could tear them apart. As the applause rang out, echoing through the chapel, Daniel and Celeste stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever life had in store for them. The world may have tried to silence their love, but now they knew that their story was one that no one could ever take away. It was theirs, and theirs alone. The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and joy, but through it all, Daniel's eyes never left Celeste. He couldn't believe that she was his, that they had made it through the darkness and into the light together. He had once been a man ruled by arrogance and pride, but now he was a man who knew the true meaning of love. As the night drew to a close, they stood together under the stars, their hands entwined, their hearts beating as one. Daniel pulled her close, his voice a soft whisper in the quiet of the night. "Forever," he said, his words a promise. Celeste smiled, her heart full. Forever. And as they kissed, the world around them seemed to fall away. It was just them. Two souls, united by a love that would never fade, a love that would echo through the ages like a beautiful, endless melody. This story of Daniel and Celeste is more than just a love tale. It's a profound message for society. It speaks to the idea that love is not bound by superficial barriers such as race, class, or societal expectations. It highlights how people often create divisions based on these constructs, only to realize that true love transcends them all. The first and most powerful lesson from their journey is that judgment based on external factors, like social status or race, blind us to the true essence of a person. Daniel initially saw Celeste as beneath him simply because she was a waitress, but what he failed to understand was that her worth was not defined by her job or her skin color. Celeste, with her quiet dignity, humility, and kindness, was more than the label society had placed on her. In the end, Daniel learned that her beauty, intelligence, strength, and compassion were the qualities that truly mattered. This is a wake-up call for all of us. Too often, society judges people based on external factors, ignoring the rich inner lives, talents, and capabilities that individuals have to offer. Whether it's wealth, race, gender, or any other factor, these superficial labels limit our ability to truly connect with others and appreciate their unique gifts. As Celeste demonstrated, people often have so much more to offer than what is immediately visible to the eye. Another important message is the power of self-respect and pride. Celeste's pride in who she was, her worth as a person, her dreams, her values, was unwavering, even when Daniel initially rejected her. It's easy to let others define us, to let their opinions dictate our worth. But Celeste's strength lay in the fact that she knew her value, regardless of how others viewed her. It is a message for everyone to maintain self-respect and not to compromise who we are for anyone or anything. The story also speaks to the concept of growth and transformation. Daniel was a man ruled by pride, wealth, and arrogance at the start. But through his relationship with Celeste, he learned that true fulfillment didn't come from money or power. It came from love, respect, and the ability to grow alongside another person. His transformation wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. It took time, mistakes, and deep self-reflection, but he was willing to change for the woman he loved. This shows us that growth, though often difficult and uncomfortable, is essential for finding true happiness and connection. It also teaches us that anyone can change if they are willing to open their heart and mind. Celeste, too, demonstrated immense strength in her ability to forgive and love despite the hurt. When Daniel distanced himself from her under pressure from his friends, Celeste didn't allow her pride to turn into bitterness. She walked away, but her heart never hardened. She knew her worth and wouldn't accept anything less than the love she deserved. Yet, when Daniel came back to fight for her, she didn't turn him away. She understood that love, true love, wasn't about holding grudges or allowing the past to dictate the future. It was about healing and moving forward together. This speaks to the importance of forgiveness, not just for others, but also for ourselves. The world often teaches us that love is about possession, about winning or losing. But the truest form of love is about understanding, acceptance, and the willingness to grow together. Celeste's willingness to embrace Daniel's efforts to redeem himself shows that true love isn't about perfection. It's about making the effort to understand and cherish one another, flaws and all. The story also addresses the way society values material wealth over emotional depth. Daniel, at the beginning of the story, was living in a world where success was measured by his bank balance, the cars he drove, and the people he associated with. But through his connection with Celeste, he learned that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in relationships, empathy, and kindness. As a society, we need to redefine what success truly means and understand that no amount of money can fill the void left by loneliness, emotional disconnect, or lack of true love. Celeste, with her music and unwavering love, showed Daniel a new way to see the world, a world where love, compassion, and human connection are more valuable than material success. Through her, he learned that there was far more to life than the cold, transactional nature of his world. As a society, we must begin to understand that love and human connection should take precedence over everything else. No matter how much we accumulate in terms of wealth or status, it's our relationships with others that define us. The couple's wedding, held in an intimate ceremony, exemplifies the power of love to unite people from different backgrounds. Their union was not just the merging of two hearts, but of two worlds that were once kept apart by prejudice, pride, and fear. Society often divides people into us and them based on race, background, or social status. But Celeste and Daniel's story shows us that when two people truly love each other, nothing can stand in the way. Their love is a symbol that we must break down the walls that divide us, whether those walls are based on race, class, or any other arbitrary social distinction, and build a world where love is the common thread that unites us all. At its core, this story is a message of hope. No matter where we come from or what challenges we face, love has the power to change us. It has the power to heal wounds, to open hearts, and to bring people together. We are all capable of change and growth, and love is the catalyst that propels us forward. For society, this story is a call to action. It's time to stop judging people based on their outward appearances or superficial qualities. We need to start seeing people for who they truly are, not for the labels society has placed on them. We need to recognize the value in every human being, regardless of their race, class, or background. Finally, Daniel and Celeste's story reminds us that the greatest gift we can give to one another is unconditional love, and that love is always worth fighting for. It's not easy. It's not always fair. But when we love with our whole hearts, when we fight for those we love, and when we never let go of the belief that love can change the world, it's a battle worth fighting. Their love is a reminder to all of us that no matter the odds, no matter the pain, Love is the force that will carry us through. It is the force that unites us all, and if we embrace it, society can become a place of true equality, understanding and joy.